Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sophia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. This episode is sponsored by Big Tech's Ordnance, your soon-to-be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high-quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre- and post-sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high-level instructors to ensure that when you as the consumer reach out, you are taken care of. Today we have Matt Little of Graybeard Actual on the show. I'm so excited for this particular episode, but before we start, Matt, I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners.
Hello, everyone. Like you said, my name is Matt Little, and I own a company called Graybeard Actual. We do training in firearms, combatives, and tactics. I do stuff for civilians and military and law enforcement nationwide. A little bit just kind of on my background, because it kind of, I think, gives me a unique perspective on this, and it's kind of how I arrived at doing this. So I was in the Army, both active duty and in the National Guard for a very long time. I was in 20th Special Forces Group in the National Guard and deployed several times in the War on Terror, went to Iraq and Afghanistan. I also, at the same time, was a Chicago cop for 21 years, where I finished up training. I did plainclothes work, I did SWAT work, I did a bunch of things. But the last probably third of my career, I ran the training for the SWAT team and was still operational, so I still go on hits, right? So I think those two backgrounds kind of give me a unique perspective because a lot of people have one, but not both of them. And then the third piece of the puzzle that I think is really relevant is late in my career, at the urging of some friends of mine, I started competing in action shooting sports. And when I did that, I'd always very comfortably been the top shooter among my peers at work, either in special forces or in the Army, unless I was shooting with someone who competed in USPSA or other action shooting sports. So I finally got it through my thick skull that, I should be doing that to get better as well. So I started competing in USPSA. I made master very quickly, but I was having trouble breaking through and getting to where I wanted to be because of ingrained habits, both technically and in my training methodology from both of my careers, right? So I reverse engineered, I deconstructed and re-engineered my training to try to figure out how to break through to a new level and how to train my shooting like an athlete. And the interesting part I found is I'd always kind of viewed shooting as a martial art because I'd been a martial artist all my life. And for me now, shooting is now my martial art, right? And I competed nationally. I was nationally ranked at all of that. And the way we trained for that is very different than the way most people train their shooting, and it shouldn't be, because shooting is still an athletic skill and should be trained like any other athletic skill. So I think kind of the combination of those things gave me a very unique perspective on it, especially because I had to work very hard to fix the habits I had been given that were counterproductive, that were going to hold me back. And I want to be able to give other people the knowledge they need to not have to spend as long as I did getting there. Right? Like it shouldn't take as long as it took for me because I had a lot of detours and dead ends. And I want to give people a way to train kind of tailored to them because everybody's an individual that will enable them to reach their potential efficiently and quickly.
Wonderful. Well, that's first of all just incredible. And thank you for your service to our country. I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad you're here to share your perspective. And you're right. I hear a lot of individuals speak about one perspective or the other, but it's very rare that we have someone come from all three of a background. So yeah, I'm really glad you're here today, Matt, to share that perspective. So to kind of start, you mentioned some detours, training detours. Would you say that some of those came from your martial arts background, like starting in either like a traditional art or maybe one that wasn't as beneficial or?
More. And there was some of that in the martial arts side as well, right? Like I've evolved a lot throughout the years there. But that was more, there was a lot of value in the traditional arts I did. And there was a lot of value in the non-traditional stuff I did. And doing the non-traditional stuff enabled me to see the intent in the traditional stuff. What's wrong with the traditional arts is not the message, it's that people confuse the medium for the message. They confuse the training vehicle for the desired end state, the desired result. And I think that happens a lot in shooting too. I think that like we tend to imitate our instructors, the outward appearance of their technique in shooting. But the outward appearance doesn't tell you why it works or what they're doing to make it work. You know, take somebody's grip on a pistol, right? I can make my grip look like Robert Vogel's or Ben Steger's or any of the top shooters, but if I don't understand the pressures they're using, right, where they're pressing, the direction of the pressure, how strong they're pressing, if I don't understand those internal things in the technique, my grip, even if it looks like theirs in a photo, isn't going to have the same result. And the other thing I think that we fall prey to both in like institutional training and shooting and in traditional martial arts is trying to make a cookie cutter technique fit your body when that's not the way a human being works as an athlete. If you take the top athletes in any athletic endeavor, their technique doesn't all look the same because their bodies are different, right? But the principles of the technique are sound, and they've used the principles to figure out the best technique for them. And that experimentation process, I think, is really missing for most people's training and shooting. And I think it's vital. I think it has to be done because, like, I'll use an example. I'm 6'3" and I weigh 235, right? I am basically a Sasquatch. I'm a Wookiee that cuts his hair. These are not human hands. My thumbs don't even oppose, right?
Okay.
Like I really am like a primate. Like I'm not fully evolved.
Gotcha.
My wife, on the other hand, she's very muscular, but she's still very petite, right? She has cute little Smurfette hands. If she tried to grip a pistol like I grip a pistol, it would not work for her. Mm. Her grip works fantastic for her, but it doesn't look like mine. And if I tried to mansplain to her and make her grip the pistol like I do, it would be counterproductive to her shooting. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I use an extreme example, but everybody's body is a little bit different, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses physically and psychologically, and you have to learn to play on those. Everybody needs different cues. Everybody's technique has to be a little bit different to make it work for them.
Are you in search of top-notch gear that exceeds your expectations? Look no further than GPS, brought to you by Go Outdoors Incorporated. GPS has been dedicated to crafting the finest products for hunting and shooting since 2002. As someone who frequents the gun range, my GPS bag is a staple to safely and effectively haul my gear. Their specialized bags are designed to keep all of my valuable equipment secure and organized. With GPS, you can experience the ultimate peace of mind. There are 3 exciting product lines: GPS Tactical, GPS Wild About Hunting, and GPS Wild About Shooting provide the perfect solution for your specific needs. So whether you're on a hunting expedition or hitting the range, GPS is your reliable companion. To choose a bag that fits your needs, use code SheetShield at checkout to save and to support the pod. That's SHESHIELD at checkout. Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in this perspective because I actually originated in a traditional martial arts, and for a long time, by the time I found Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I may be pivoting slightly from your point, but I'm trying to come back to it. When I started in it, I thought it was the best thing in the world. It was really the only thing in my world at that time that I really knew about. So, I thought it was the best thing ever. I thought it was so cool until someone got me on the ground and my coach stopped the timer for sparring and had us stand up. And I was like, wait, hold on. What happens if I'm actually on the street? No one's going to stop a timer or tell the opponent to give me a fair chance. So I started getting curious and looking into Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, weapons-based entanglement, and all of that. And looking back now with the perspective of all of it, I'm able to see that it had its place. It maybe wasn't the most realistic art or training style for me as a female who likes to do activities alone and everything, but it absolutely had its place in the foundation of my training and like setting me up on that trajectory. Is there anything you would like to speak to when it comes to the purpose or maybe even like the benefits of a traditional martial arts compared to something more modern like grappling and MMA?
Yeah, and like first off, I would say that if I was going to tell somebody who had limited training time as an adult who wanted to learn how to fight quickly, those are the two arts I would recommend: Muay Thai and BJJ. Because if I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of training in both of those to be way more equipped for a fight than almost everybody out there.
Right.
So that's a good thing to do, absolutely.
Good
But
point.
I really like a lot of the stuff in the traditional arts as well. And I did a pretty deep dive into like really traditional stuff, like classic jiu-jitsu, not modern stuff, like the classic old school, samurai jiu-jitsu, kinjutsu, yaijutsu, the Filipino weapons-based stuff, like all of that. And I'm going to make it relate to shooting again,
Okay.
because it does, because shooting is a martial art, right? So in a classical martial art, a lot of the medium used to embody the message is kata, right? Even in the Filipino stuff, there's all those Sinawali patterns, and those are forms as well.
Right.
They're not a real fight. And everybody confuses that, but it's like a bill drill is not a gunfight either, right?
Right.
It's not. A bill drill is a drill designed to build your transition speed so that it's faster. People need to understand the purpose and intent of what they're doing, right? And you have to practice mindfully, and you have to practice with intent, and everything has to have a plan. People try to get really good at the kata instead of using the drill as a mechanism to improve an attribute or skill they need for the fight, right? And like if you look at like Bruce Lee, I'm a big fan of Bruce Lee's stuff. I mean, the cinematic stuff is a bit flashy, but the actual JKD is really good, especially for its time.
Right.
And he drew all of that from traditional arts and just stripped away the excess, right? Just got rid of the stuff that was affectation, that wasn't needed. And I think that is kind of the process. The process isn't adding, it's eliminating, right? And going back to what I said earlier about how we tend to imitate our instructors in shooting without understanding what we're imitating, you see that in martial arts too. And people wind up imitating an affectation or imitating the way somebody moves because they have an injury, right? Instead of moving like they should move because they're a different person. Going back to Bruce Lee, he's a great example. He had actually a birth defect. One leg was 2 inches longer than the other. And that led to a lot of his unique footwork and the way he would advance on someone, especially for kicking. But you have to understand that he's compensating for an injury, right?
Right.
Like I got hurt bad in the Army, so I don't know if you can see the scars on the video, but they had to reconstruct my arm. And so I have things I have to compensate for when I shoot because I can't feel these fingers because of the nerve damage.
Okay.
They still grip, I just can't feel them.
Okay.
So I cam in on the gun a little bit, not so much to aid the grip, but to make sure that I can feel the pressure because I can't feel the touch. I can only feel the pressure. Sure. And that's a cue I use to make sure I'm gripping correctly with this hand. But if you don't have the nerve damage, you don't need to do that, right? So somebody imitating that particular idiosyncrasy of mine wouldn't be doing themselves a service if they don't have the same reason to do it. Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that like there's a lot of good in like the institutional firearms training I got. But the failings of it were the same failings from the classical martial arts training I got, because there was a lot of good in that too. The failings were not truly getting people to understand the message inside the drill, the message inside the kata, right? Like what am I working on? What am I doing this drill for? Like I'll give you another example. Take the bill drill. Like almost everybody knows what a bill drill is, right? You draw and you fire 6 shots. Well, what am I working on in the bill drill? Am I working on grip? Am I working on tracking the sights? Am I working on getting a consistent grip on a fast draw? Am I working on relaxing this hand so I can split faster? And the answer is it can be any one of those things. But I have to decide before I do the drill.
Right.
And because of the way our brain works, I can't really work on all of those at once, right? So when I do a bill drill, I've got to go, okay, so today I'm focusing on this because this is what I need to work on. And I'll use the bill drill for that. And that's how you need to look at it. Like the drill is not the point. It's not, I don't do bill drills to get better at bill drills.
Right.
I do bill drills to make myself a better, more well-rounded shooter for whatever application I need to use it for, whether it's competitive or defensive, right? So I'm trying to build a broad set of tools to solve problems, right, with my attributes and skills, not just get better at a particular pattern, right? El Presidente, I love El Pres. But once again, El Pres is very much like a kata, right? Like it really is. So what am I working on when I do the El Pres? Well, for me, I consider the El Pres a combination drill. So what I'm working on, because there's too many elements that are disparate, right? You have a draw, you have a reload, you have splits, transitions. So I'm not focusing on any one thing when I do an El Pres. Rather, I'm trying to build consistency on demand when I do that drill. If I want to work on the individual elements of it, I'll take it down and I'll do a Blake drill for the transitions, or I'll do, a turning draw to a bill drill to work on the draw and having a good grip on the draw. I'll do 4 aces to work on the reloads, and then I'll come back to the El Pres and I'll use that to kind of test it and give me a feedback and see what I'm doing, right? But too many people, I think, do stuff like an El Presidente just to get better at doing the El Presidente. And that's really not the point of training. Right? Because you don't know, if you're going to a USPSA match, you don't know what the stages are going to be until that match book comes out, right? And there could be all kinds of challenges. You will never know what the gunfight is going to be until it happens. And just because the average one is 1 assailant, 3 to 5 yards, 3 to 5 shots, 3 to 5 seconds, and that is true, that is the average, that is the median, right? There's outliers. You don't know what you're going to get. You could get multiple people. You could get a 25-yard shot. You could get the 40-yard shot that Dickens took in the food court. You don't know until it happens. So you need to be well-rounded and competent and good at all of it and prepared. And the way to do that is to look at the actual mechanisms of your training and make them have a point, have an intent, have a purpose, right? Not just walk through it by rote, but actually be paying attention to the things that you need to work on to get better.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, this is going to probably come out a little, not just, this isn't rehearsed, but I sometimes have these moments when I, as a podcast host, I've been so lucky to have so many bookings lately to have guest speakers on. And I have these moments sometimes where I feel like, whether, it's God or something else has just kind of aligned this topic to like what I need to hear in my personal journey. And I'm just having all these epiphanies as you're talking. I'll have like a thought and a really good question, and then it'll go away because you'll say something else really profound. But I really appreciate, I just want to make this very clear, just how much I appreciate this perspective. Particularly, I recently decided with my best friend that we are going to take on the tactical games in September. And we were talking about like what training do we need to do? Like, where do we even start? We're both USPSA novice competitors. She competes more than me, and at a higher level than me. But we were talking about like, what do we do next? And it's overwhelming to think of the amount of options for drills out there. And this is incredible timing, because I feel like I was losing that perspective on like, what drill do I need to do next? Not what skill do I need to get better at? And then what drill can I use to help that skill better? So I really appreciate that perspective. Truly.
Yeah. The drill to me is it's a tool, right? Yeah. The drill is a framework you use to try to get a desired training effect. Otherwise, like I said, you're just practicing the drill.
Absolutely. So for people, and let's just say of all age ranges, that are trying to start out and find what skill to maybe work first and prioritize their training, because it's so easy to just say, I have so much to learn. It's almost like paralyzing. I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm just going to wait for someone to tell me what to do. What would you recommend to them? What kind of mentality should they take on to create a plan and prioritize their training?
So the first thing they've got to do is they've got to do like a needs analysis, right? Like what do I need to be good at? And they've got to pick that for themselves. And it's something that's very personal. Like I can't dictate to somebody else how good they need to be, or how good they think they need to be. But I can guarantee it's probably better than they think it is. They probably need to be a little better than they think.
That's fair.
But But getting back to that, right? So like someone who carries defensively, what skills do I need to have and how do I get there? And it's actually not that hard to do. You want to take the 80%, so the 20% of skills that are the 80% most likely to be used, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those get 80% of the work. It's called the Pareto principle.
Okay.
And then the 80% of stuff that only gives you like 20% of use out of it,
Mm-hmm.
that gets 20% of your training time.
Okay.
So if you were purely a defensive person, 80% of your training time would probably be spent on draws and relatively close range shooting and trying to be very fast and accurate, right? And that would be like a good starting place. How quick is my concealment draw? Can I do a bill drill from concealment under 2 seconds at 7 yards? Can I do Scott Jedlinski's black belt patch standards? Can I do my 345 skill card standard, right? But then the other 20% of your training time should be things like that 40-yard headshot that Dickens took in the head court, or in the food court. I mean, head court.
Right.
I guess it was a head court that day.
Right.
But food court, I meant food court. The 40-yard shot in the food court, are one-handed shooting, malfunction clearances, being wounded, shooting from supine, all those other things you might encounter in a fight. One of my personal favorites, because people don't take into account getting punched in the grill and then having to shoot and that kind of off-balance feeling. I love making people who are defensive shooters stand on a 2x4 and try to balance and shoot one-handed.
Huh.
Because, yes, you're never going to stand on a 2x4 in a real gunfight, but you could have your clock cleaned and not have your balance and still have to shoot. So it's a way to simulate that.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
All of those things, and you can, the sky's the limit when it comes to the 20% of your training time. Throw a bunch of things in there, challenge yourself, all of that. But that 80% of your training time's got to be on the fundamentals. And even though it's statistically unlikely, I would include a reload. Because, yes, it's statistically unlikely, but when it happens, you really need to be good at it.
Yeah.
It's like a reserve parachute. You may never need it, but when you need it, you really, really do.
That's a good
So
point.
same thing with the sub-second draw. You're probably never going to need a sub-second draw in real life. But if you need it more than anything else in your life.
Yes.
So,
Wow.
Things like that, like the low frequency but high risk payout things should get a lot of attention too.
Absolutely. And for someone kind of on a maybe more basic level, for someone who's listening and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is El Presidente? Isn't that Biden? Just kidding. What would you recommend they do? Would you recommend a one-on-one class with an instructor like yourself, or that they travel to a class that's kind of ranked for their their experience level? What would you say?
So it's a difficult topic as a beginner, right? Because a lot of the local beginners classes out there are just as likely to instill a bad habit as a good one.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think where I would start, honestly, is I would get, you could get my book, you could get Ben Steger's books, you could get Steve Anderson's Dry Fire books. And we live in a great age for people who want to be able to shoot, because all the stuff that is on YouTube now was not available in the past. It's out there, right? Here's my feeling on shooting skill too, okay? And this comes from a guy who's been in gunfights.
Right.
If I want to learn how to fight, I'm going to go to somebody who's been in fights. If I'm going to learn the technique of shooting, I could care less. I don't care if they've only been a gamer and that's the only shots they've ever fired. The guy that arguably had the biggest influence on my shooting has never been in a gunfight, and I guarantee you he doesn't want to be in a gunfight. He's not that guy, right? But he's a world champion shooter, and he taught me a lot. Shooting is a skill. Tactics are different, right? I want to learn tactics from somebody who's actually used them. But when it comes to shooting, I'm going to seek out the people who can shoot the best, and those are the top competitors. So if I was a new person, I would start just devouring things on the internet with JJ Racaza, Casey Eusebio, Christian Seiler, Ben Steger, Isaac Lockwood, just a million. There's a million people out there, right? There's It just they're all just phenomenal shooters. Tim Herron, AJ Zito. There's, and if I'm forgetting any of my friends, I'm sorry because I know all these people, but there's just so many,
Of
right?
course, yes.
Riley Bowman. Riley Bowman's a great friend
Yes.
of mine and a great instructor and a phenomenal shooter, right? So like
Yes.
all of these people, it's all out there. You can get information now for free on the internet that would have been impossible to get just 20 years ago. So I would just start devouring that stuff. Get my books, get Ben's books. My book, I have one. Get Ben's books and go through them. All the drills are in there. All the standards are in there. How good you need to be for a certain level. It's all in there, right? And I'd spend a lot of time dry firing, honestly, before I went to a class. I really would.
Absolutely.
And then I would find a class by a shooter, right? And then go to the tactics classes because you can outshoot bad tactics. You can never out-tactic bad shooting, right? All the tactics in the world aren't going to help you if you can't hit the target in a compressed time frame under stress.
Good point.
So get the shooting first, get the shooting first, and then layer the tactics on top of it.
That's a really good point. And something I'm flashing back to, and I bring this up all the time because I just can't recommend it enough, it was Craig Douglas's ECQC. And I remember going to that course, called my best friend at the time, and I was like, I am so nervous. I don't even know if I know how to shoot well. I have a page for concealed carry, but what am I doing? And she was like, just go and experience it. Just take it in, whatever. And I feel like if I would have gone a bit more prepared on the skill side, that I would have been able to maybe absorb the information about Craig's particular tactics teachings. So for example, we start out on the firing line in the morning, and then we go on to do the simulation training that incorporates a little bit of grappling and the dirt, as he likes to do. And I remember just being so overwhelmed in the morning because the shooting part was so new to me at the time. And by the time I would get to the tactics side, I was like wiped, like almost like just overwhelmed mentally. And I'm not saying I shouldn't have gone to that course. That's not what I'm trying to say. But you have a really good point there, like preparing for the fundamentals almost so that you can actually appreciate the course fully, right?
You need those skills. And I'm not saying you have to be like a USPSA master class shooter before you go to a tactics class. That's not what I mean. Right. But you need to be subconsciously competent and safe with the gun.
Absolutely.
So that you're not, because what you're talking about, what happened to you was you had to think about it, right?
Yes.
It was still conscious. It wasn't a subconscious skill. So because you had to think about it, it gave you too many things to think about. And we used to see that all the time, not so much in SF because the guys in SF have a higher level of shooting. Right. But on the law enforcement side, whenever I see somebody who struggles in the shoot house, it's because they're not a good shooter by the team standards, not by ordinary standards, right?
Right.
Because if you have to think about the shooting, you can't do the tactics right. The shooting has to run in the background. It's like, the software in your computer that runs in the background, you don't even see it?
Yes.
Like that's your shooting.
Right.
And the tactics are the windows you have open and the things you're typing, right?
Yes.
So the shooting just has to happen. It's got to just be on its own. And the only way to do that is to get good at shooting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Honestly, all of this applies to everyone at any skill level because we can always take time to assess where we're at and then make a plan for training going forward. And that way we're also not wasting our money and our time and someone else's time. So I really, really appreciate this perspective on many, many levels. And speaking of your book, I was intending on bringing this up anyway, but it is called The Way is in Training. And if you're listening and you're interested, you can go to the show notes, the notes below the title. I will have everything linked there. For those that are interested in reading your book, would you like to give a little bit of a summary or what they can expect when they open it up?
Yeah, no, it is basically written to my 18-year-old self to give him all the knowledge that I have now in my 50s.
That's nice.
Or, someone like I was at 18. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of it in the book is meant to make you think for yourself and discover things for yourself. Because like I said earlier, I'm a big believer that the principles are inviolable, right? Like they're universal, they're absolute. The principles are. But everybody has to learn to embody those principles in a different way because we're all different people. Our psychology is different, our physiology is different, our operating environment is different. The way I did things in Afghanistan is different than the way I did things in Chicago, and it's different than the way I do things now that I'm retired. If I got in a fight now as a retired guy, I would be very different from the things I used to do in those professions. And you have to understand that. So I want people to think. I want people to think about their training, to think about where they want to be, and if they have to apply it, how they're going to apply it. So I try to put a lot of lessons in there from the military and the police and competition, not so much just about the technical side of things, but about the principles of it so that you can think about it and apply it for yourself. And of course, there's a lot in there about, a bunch of shooting drills and how to organize your training and how to make it have an intent and a plan and a goal. I've got same thing for fitness. I've got fitness training in there as well. All of those aspects are in there. I've got stuff on combatives and all of that, and it's kind of one package because I kind of think of it as all the same thing. There's a real tendency in military and law enforcement to have guys that are either combatives guys or shooting guys, right? And the shooting guys aren't as good at combatives, even though they have a basic working knowledge. And the combatives guys aren't as good at shooting, even though they're competent. I never wanted that. I wanted to be a complete package, right? It's all the same to me. Everything from grappling to shooting a sniper rifle is just part of the total package, right? So that's kind of the approach the book takes as well. It's pretty comprehensive. It's I think it's 450 pages, I think. Wonderful. Something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I truly appreciate that holistic approach, and I try to be as well-rounded as possible with combatives and shooting. And it's one of the reasons I joined USPSA, even though my goal isn't to become a grandmaster, even though that would be pretty cool if it just happened, but it doesn't just happen. So, balancing weapons-based entanglement, balancing training how I carry, and then of course competitive shooting that's more game-like. And it's truly been, oh man, it's been hard to realize how stratified everything is in this industry. And it's taken some time to see that. And I'm still learning it. I would say I'm still fairly new to this industry. I switched from my medical background to just fully immersing myself into this industry about a year and a half to 2 years ago. And the more I'm in it, the more I realize that not only are people kind of stratified, but they also almost like compete with each other. Like there's not like a welcoming sense of combining all of them together. It's a lot of, I see a lot more of like contention between people saying one is better than the other. So this type of perspective is one of the reasons I started the podcast. I wanted to bring light to the fact that the more well-balanced we can be, the better we are as humans and as prepared citizens. So I love that perspective. I'm excited to read your book. I did a little research before the show, and I was sad I didn't see it sooner, so I could have come more prepared and had actually read it. But yeah, is it also available on Audible? I feel bad asking that, but
it is.
Okay,
it is.
Good. Okay,
it is.
It's yeah,
and obviously you don't get like the diagrams of the drills, but I explain the drills pretty well in the written part. So it's still, people like the audiobook more than I thought they would, actually.
Nice.
And no, it's not me reading it. I hired a guy. He's actually Canadian. He's a voice actor.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. I had just finished editing it. There was no way I was going to sit down and record it. I was just done. I'd had enough.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
It took me 6 months after finishing the book before I could write another blog post. I was just fried.
That is totally fair. Yep. That's totally fair. I appreciate you kind of admitting that and like being vulnerable and sharing that, because the creative process is, I totally, as a podcast host, I mean, I've not written a book. I've not gotten, to that extent in my journey. And that is, that's beyond podcasting, obviously. But I definitely have a lot of help when it comes to creating content around these episodes, because the creative process itself just takes so much from you sometimes. So I don't blame you at all for not wanting to dive into blog work right after releasing it. But I'm glad that it's on Audible. That's actually how I've been kind of mostly reading books. I hate to say reading. I feel like a phony when I say that, but for those that are listening and prefer that and know that that's the only way you might actually consume this book, this is good to know, and I'll link it as well.
Yep. And it's also got like a Kindle version, and it's on iBooks too. So
wonderful. Yes. My sister is a Kindle fiend, so she doesn't even like paperback anymore. So things like that are very helpful. It's awesome.
Yeah, and if you are into martial arts, you'll probably like the cover because it's kind of a mashup of. There's a guy. He's actually a tattoo artist in Dublin, Ireland.
Okay.
But he does ukiyo-e, like the traditional Japanese woodblock prints.
Yes.
And he likes shooting and tactics. So he's done these woodblock prints. Like he did one for Scott Jedlinski. He did one for me. He did, a few other people that are famous in the industry. And I liked it so much, I used it for the cover of the book with his permission, of course.
Right.
But it's basically like a mashup it's me and a mashup of my kit from Afghanistan and samurai armor. So it's kind of cool.
It's very cool. I'm looking at it right now.
Like that's kind of, and it was cool you saying that you started out as a martial artist as well, because that's where I started, long before the army or anything else. And everything has pretty much been an outgrowth of that, and like I really enjoy, like the works of Masashi, the works of Lee, the Tao Jeet Kune Do, Masashi's Book of Five Rings, Sun Tzu, all of that. And in my own humble way, I kind of tried to do that with the book for the modern era and for what we do.
Right.
So it was my humble attempt at that. So yes, hopefully people like it.
Absolutely. And for those listening that maybe you want to see this, like while Matt is talking about it, we do a lot of highlights on the social media. So we'll take this and combine it with your book cover so that people can see what it looks like while you're talking about it. I love that we can do that. So if you're interested in that, head over to the social. I'd love to pivot a little bit and see just more about your background in with military, as far as sharing some insights into how your work as a government contractor and non-permissive environments and how that differs from your previous roles in law enforcement. Would you be willing to share kind of your perspective on that?
Yeah. So the contract work, I actually took a leave of absence from the police department to do that. And the reason I did that was because they were sending 20th Group to Afghanistan, but not Iraq. And I wanted to collect all the baseball cards. Right. I didn't want to miss one of the theaters. It was very interesting, actually, because it was right after the invasion of Iraq. So it was in 2004. And it was very, very much the Wild West. And I met a lot of really amazing people doing it. And I actually saw, so this is difficult to articulate, sure, right? I saw a higher volume of action during that trip to Iraq than I saw in my Afghanistan deployment.
Okay.
The highest volume of action I saw was in Chicago, actually. Volume, right? You have volume and you have intensity, though.
Okay.
And the intensity in SF in Afghanistan was much higher. Then the intensity in Iraq was lower, but was very, very frequent. And then the intensity in Chicago was lower still, but like just nonstop, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But every role has a different rules of engagement. Every role has a different purpose. And that's one of the things I talk about that I think give me a unique perspective, is having that kind of broader sense of it. Because I know plenty of people that have done the things I've done in isolation, but then you ask them to apply it to a different environment, and sometimes they have difficulty, right? Like the things I would do on a hit in Afghanistan are different than things I would do on a raid as a SWAT guy. You see what I'm saying? Yes. The rules of engagement are different. It's a different environment.
Right.
And it's different still being an armed civilian. And I did some narcotics and gang work, some organized crime stuff in Chicago, including buying some dope. And I got in some stuff as a plainclothes guy, that was not trying to look like the police. I got in engagements that way in Chicago.
Mm.
And that's a lot closer to what you would do as a civilian. And it's very, very different than hitting a building with 11 other Green Berets and, capturing everybody inside or getting into a gunfight. That's a very different kind of confrontation than one-on-one or one-on-two or two-on-two in plain clothes on the streets of the west side of Chicago. It's two entirely different things. And having skill at one gives you attributes, and it gives you are you familiar with chunking, the theory of chunking
No,
they use
actually.
for sports psychology? So chunking is you build these little Lego blocks of skill. And then depending on the problem you're given, you assemble these blocks in a different way to give you a tool to solve the problem. So like a chunk could be your draw, right? Your concealment draw.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those little chunks are the same, right? And some apply in one situation and not the others, but some apply in all three, right? But you've got to understand how to apply those things differently based on the situation you're in. And the only way to have that flexibility is to build it into your training from the beginning, unless you do like I did and spend decades doing it the hard way.
Right.
I would far recommend doing it from the beginning so that you're better prepared. You don't have to do it the hard way.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And as far as when you apply that to teaching civilians, what does that application process look like?
So I'll take two of my classes and I'll talk about it, right? So I have a class that's purely skill development, and I have a class that is applications from concealment. It's concealed pistol applications is the name of that class.
Okay.
The skill development class, there's no tactics in it at all, but everything I do, I talk about how you would apply it in different situations. So people start thinking that way.
Right.
The applications class, I'm not building skill per se. I'm trying to show them how to use the skills they've built depending on the situation. And it's a live fire class, not a force on force class. There are limitations that way, but you can still set up a bunch of scenarios. And now you're no longer shooting them as a skill development drill. You're shooting them to replicate an engagement you might possibly be in. And that's a different mindset and approach.
Right.
When I'm doing something to build skill, I'm doing it one particular way. And then when I have to apply it, I've got to apply it with the tactics layered on top of it, and I've got to apply it subconsciously on demand with a high enough level of skill.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. As far as some training scars you've seen in the students that have come your way, first of all, do you recognize a lot of training scars in general from students that have gone to instructors that don't have as much perspective maybe as you in the real world, or is that something you haven't noticed very much?
So yes, I have.
Okay.
I have noticed it. And I think that, so I have a kind of a different perspective on training scars than some people do. Okay. So some people, one of the tropes of the training industry that I really hate is train like you fight. And I'm going to explain that.
Okay.
So take an MMA fighter. No MMA fighter does nothing but spar full contact, no pads in the octagon in their training. They don't do that in their training every day because it wouldn't be productive, right? But that would be training like you fight.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's
they
fair.
train for the fight. They train for the fight.
Right.
No football team does nothing but put on all their pads and scrimmage every time they practice. No team that wins anyway.
Right.
They do drills to make themselves better at the football for the game. That's the approach you need to take. And if you take that approach, you're not going to build training scars the same way as often. Because I'll take isolation drills, because I categorize drills as experimentation, isolation, combination, and validation, right? And they each have a different intent and purpose. So say an isolation drill, say I'm doing a bill drill, right? If I understand what I'm trying to accomplish by the drill, it is not a training scar if I abort a failed repetition because I don't want to get that bad repetition grooved in. And I'll do that all the time in my training, working isolation. If I have a bad draw, if I have a bad rep, I'll abort the rep because it's not helping me. I'm not going to learn from it, right? A lot of people would say that would be a training scar for the real world, but if you're training properly, it's not going to be because that's isolation work. when I come to the combination and validation work, I have to fight through anything that happens, and I never abort a rep. There's a difference in mindset between skill development and skill application. And as long as you train both and you train the mindset for skill application and you don't put any training scars in your training there, that's important too.
Right.
Then you'll be fine.
Huh.
Right.
Okay.
But I'll tell you my pet peeve training scar that I see from law enforcement and military all the time. And I used to do it too. And you can always tell the first time a cop has gone to a USPSA match by the fact that he does this between every target. Okay. Is pulling the gun in here when you don't have to.
Okay.
And you see it all the time. You see it all the time.
Okay.
If there's no reason to dismount the gun, you don't dismount the gun, right? You dismount the gun when there's a reason to. But that's a training scar. That's a habit because it's built into conventional institutional training for law enforcement, right? And like I said, it was a training scar I had. I did it all the time. And I had to beat it out of myself because it's counterproductive. Everything you do should have a purpose and an intent, not be an affectation. And pulling the pistol in every single time you fire 2 rounds is an affectation.
Yep. I just have to take a moment to say I have a training scar 100%. I was watching myself shoot. So I did a video on fanny pack carry and the contraindications of it when it comes to weapons-based entanglement. So someone like basically using the fanny pack to choke you, what are the... Right. What are some cons when it comes to like having to draw from the fanny pack when you're on the ground? The fanny pack rolls towards your face. There's a lot of things like that. And I did a YouTube video on this, but I also went to the range and drew from the fanny pack. And I noticed myself coming to a compressed ready. That's what it's called, right? Compressed ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Compressed. So for those of you just listening and not watching, you brought your hands into the chest. So he was talking about compressed ready earlier. And so I was doing that, and I was, look to my left, look to my right, look behind me before reholstering. And I noticed that, like, before I was even finished with the second shot, I was, like, pulling my gun in. And I don't know why. Like, I don't know where that came from. I think it's... I don't know. I don't even have a law enforcement background.
You're not alone.
Okay.
You're not alone. It's a very, very common thing.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing, and it's one of my pet peeves.
Oh yeah, same. I mean,
it's
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times, like, God, and I've been guilty of this too, right? You start wanting to drop the mic in training when you have a good run. Mm-hmm. You know how, like, the phrase drop the mic and walk off, right?
Yes, yeah.
So they'll shoot a great bill drill and they'll do exactly what you're talking about. On the 6th bullet, who knows where that 6th bullet went because they're already pulling the gun back in.
Right.
Are there speed reholstering?
Oh my
right?
God, yes.
And I used to do that too. I used to speed reholster and drop the mic when I had a really good run because I was like, yeah,
absolutely.
It's not what you want to do.
Right.
It's not what you want to do.
Right.
So
yes.
those things like that annoy me.
Mm-hmm.
I see bad tactics a lot.
Okay.
But I view that as different than a training scar.
Okay.
Right? Training scar is like something we just talked about. It's like a little affectation, a mannerism that you've built in that is counterproductive.
Right.
And I don't like the scan and assess on the flat range either. But that's a whole nother topic.
Okay.
I think that it's artificial. I think that it's like are you familiar with the phrase zanshin?
No, actually.
It comes from traditional martial arts, Japanese martial arts, right? And it means continuing mind. And the whole idea is that it's like, even when you're done, you're not done yet because you're still mentally aware, which is sound, and you need to have that. But the problem is that trying to portray that on the flat range through theatrics isn't the same thing. It's a mental thing, not a physical thing. And if I'm going to scan and assess in the real world, I'm not going to stand in the same spot and look over my shoulder.
That's a good point.
I'm going to find somewhere that I can put my back to that is safe, where I can see everything and keep a gun on the bad guy because he might still get up. Right. So it's like, that's a pet peeve of mine. Following the imaginary offender to the ground with the muzzle is a pet peeve of mine. Like, the target didn't fall, dude. It's still there.
Right.
You're going to do that. Like, you're going to do that. I can tell you 100%.
Yeah.
You are going to keep your gun on the bad guy in the real world.
Right.
I know this for a fact because I've done it my share of times. Right.
Right.
So you don't have to train that. It's by training it, you may do it when you don't need it. Then it becomes a training scar.
Makes a lot of
The
sense.
same thing with the scan and assess. By doing that every time you shoot a string of fire, what have you done to yourself? You've created a habit that may not be productive in the real world. I don't do any of that in isolation work. Now, if you want to build a scenario where you practice that as part of the scenario, that is 100% viable, right? You see the difference?
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? Like skill development, throwing those things into skill development,
Yeah.
it wastes time you could be using to learn because you're spending time on a skill that takes no skill. The scanning and assessing is not a skill. You're not even really looking when you do it. It's all just theatrics. And you're building a bad habit. So for isolation work, I would just do the skill development. Now, when it's time to practice tactics, that's a different story. And you're going to find out really quick, like doing Sims or doing Craig Douglas's class. Or I love Craig, by the way. Craig is fantastic.
Yes.
You know, our Cliff Byerly down here in Texas, he does some really good stuff too. Right? So like if you're doing one of those things or you're doing a force on force class, you're going to figure out real quick where you need to be looking. Because if you don't look there, you're going to get shot.
Right.
Right. That's the way to learn it. The way to learn it is not to stand on the flat range and I call it the Power Ranger.
Okay. Oh no.
So here's the Power Ranger.
Okay. That's such a good point. Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah.
I'm the olive drab ranger.
Yeah. That's awesome. This is calling me out in the best way, and there are only a few times during She Shield that I've like pulled my eyelids down out of like just almost upset at myself, because I taught a young woman who I have a follow-up lesson with her coming up soon, thank God. But she asked me she said she'd heard something about contextual training. She didn't really know what it meant. And like I gave her the example of ECQC, and she was like, can we incorporate a little bit of that? And I was like, sure. So like, let's pretend you're in a crowded place and like this target that is maybe approaching you. You've already tried some verbal de-escalation. He's still approaching you. You have your kid with you. And maybe you saw him like looking beyond you, and you maybe like saw a cue that he was behind you. Or there was another person behind you that was maybe part of this guy's team to maybe kidnap you, whatever. We would probably scan and look behind us. But after I told her that, I noticed like the rest of our training, when we were really just focusing on skills, which I'm realizing now I need to slow down these concepts with newbies. It's like hitting me all at once. But I noticed later on she scanned no matter what, even when we weren't talking about a context. And I realized that I was doing that when I watched my fanny pack videos. So you're saying that's potential, that's a training scar because it could harm the outcome if it's not needed in a real life scenario, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a possibility that the guy you shot is down and he's still a threat. And now you're looking over your shoulder and he's coming back up.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a crowd gathering. This happened to me as a cop. There's a crowd gathering and you've got your gun on the guy you just shot. And now there's a gun on the ground that's evidence. And there's a crowd gathering that wants to take that gun and wants to kill you.
Oh.
And if I'm automatically doing the Power Ranger, I'm not addressing the actual problem. You guys see what I mean?
Yes.
It's like tactics are a lot like triage. You were in the medical field, so I know you're familiar with the term triage.
Yes.
You pick the biggest problem. You pick the biggest source of bleeding and you stop that first, right? And that's the same with tactics, especially as an individual. And that's the other like disconnect between like everybody wants to learn CQB. And I'm not saying civilians shouldn't learn CQB. I'm not.
Right.
But CQB is a very specific skill. It's a team-based assault on a structure. There's a reason that when you do CQB, you're called an assaulter because you're assaulting a structure. That's very, very different than a civilian defending their home or someone alone out in public. There are principles you use in CQB that you would use in the other situations too, but it's not going to look the same because it's not the same thing. You don't have 11 of your best friends with you with rifles, right?
Right.
You know, you're not going into a place where you're authorized to capture them, and if they resist, it's okay if you kill them.
Right.
That's not what you're doing as a civilian.
Right.
It's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
So even though the principles and the hard skills transfer across, you've got to understand what it is you're training for and what your needs are, right? And that's another one of my pet peeves is, and I own kit still. Like I've got a helmet and a plate carrier. I've got a lot of helmets and plate carriers,
Nice.
but I don't wear them when I teach.
Right.
And if a civilian shows up to one of my classes in a helmet and a plate carrier, I'm probably going to tell them they should take it off
Right.
because that's not. First off, it's going to interfere with the development of basic skill.
Makes
Right.
sense. Mm-hmm.
Kit is something you layer on once you've built the skill and see how it affects the skill. You don't train in kit every day, just like the football player doesn't put on pads every practice, all their pads, right?
Right.
It's the same thing. And if a civilian shows up and they're kitted out, I'm like, what is your intent here? What is your goal?
Right.
What are you trying to accomplish? Now, having said that, the flip side of that, because I've mellowed a bit in my old age, I used to be a lot stronger in that opinion than I am now.
Okay.
Because I understand that there is a group of people that are treating this very much like a martial art. And it would be a bit hypocritical coming from someone that still has Japanese swords hanging on their wall that they've actually used in training.
Right.
It would be hypocritical of me to say that you couldn't do this as a martial art and that wouldn't be okay. It is okay if that's your intent. But understand that that's your intent.
Right.
Understand that it's not the same. You're not going to throw on your plate carrier and your helmet at 2 a.m. when the guy breaks in your front door. You're just going to grab your gun.
Right.
So if you understand that and your intent is to do it purely as a martial art for like self-development, I'm fine with that. But understand that's what you're doing.
Absolutely. I'm thinking back to my sword form days. I have my wooden sword still in my closet at home. My mom keeps asking if we can get rid of it. I'm like, no, absolutely not. So much nostalgia associated with that. Or like my, I think they're called, oh man, it's been so long since I practiced this, but jolbongs, which is, I believe that's nunchucks, like the Korean term for it. It's either dolbongs
Korean version,
or jolbong. It's been a while.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I didn't do a lot of Korean stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask
all
you,
my
what
stuff was either
was yours based in your traditional art? Sorry, you're about to say it.
I started out in Shotokan Karate and Kodokan Judo, right?
Okay.
And I liked having both.
Yeah,
I liked having
absolutely.
the grappling and the striking
Yes.
even back then.
Yeah.
I did Aikido, I did Jujutsu, Kinjutsu, I did Jeet Kune Do, I did BJJ and Kali Arnis, and played around with people with Muay Thai and stuff like that, but I never trained formally in Muay Thai.
Right.
So
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you for clarifying, because that's way more than what I did, but we definitely had sword form and, nunchuck stuff. We even did archery, and don't get me wrong, as a high schooler, when my dad didn't live at home, I felt like I needed to be the protector of my family. So, I had an archery kit right next to my bed, and I was like, I'm about to just, I guess, I don't know if it's bow down someone. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was like, I don't know.
I don't know
I
if
was
it
like,
is, but
I was going to do my damnedest.
I'm adopting it now. I'm adopting it.
Yes, you can have
I'm
it.
finding a way to use that in conversation.
Perfect. Right, because it's gun down or bow down. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's relevant.
Arrow down, bow down. Yeah,
Yes.
It's not bullet down, so it would be
Right.
bow down.
I think so.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally had that at the time. But for someone who wasn't even allowed to own a gun yet, that was practical for me at the time. But yes, I love what you're talking about, because it's like, find your purpose and then train for that. But don't just wear plate carrier and helmet to wear a plate carrier and helmet, even though it looks cool sometimes.
The people that did it for a living never wear them all the time anymore. I wonder why.
It's
not as cool as it looks.
That's totally fair.
It's really not as cool as it looks.
And you guys actually,
although I've still got like my kit for my last deployment.
Oh, really?
Is
okay.
on a Japanese armor stand in my dry fire room. So it's
Really?
displayed like the samurai would display their armor. Yeah.
That's
so
actually really
it's
cool.
because it's nostalgic to me.
Right. Yes.
It's nostalgic to me, but it's not something you're going to throw on a moment. There's a purpose for it.
Right.
And like I said, if you want to wear it for a purpose that makes sense, I'm fine with it. But wearing it just to wear it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've had a lot of, I didn't even intend to like bring this up today, but I've had a lot of I've been struggling lately with like what to train in, what to really focus on my training. Sorry, let me start over. I've been struggling with how to balance my training from inside the waistband to outside the waistband, and then moving all the way to now, like I mentioned, my best friend and I are looking into the tactical games, and we're looking at level 1, level 2 retention holsters because we just don't want our guns to fall out of our holsters if we, jump over a wall and something, our body goes upside down accidentally. We just don't want to be those people that get DQ'd anyway. So I'm having to kind of like figure out how I'm going to balance all of these different training modalities. Do you have any input for that?
You just got to prioritize.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was going into, and I do this too, because I shoot IDPA from concealment, and I shoot USPSA strong side in the hip.
Nice.
And I try to make sure that I never neglect one of them,
okay.
but I focus on whatever's coming next.
Okay.
So like I'm shooting an IDPA match on Sunday, and I'm shooting it with a gun I've never shot a match with before. It's a little bit different than my normal gun.
Okay.
So right now I'm doing 100 draws and 100 reloads every day, appendix,
Nice.
getting ready for the match this weekend.
Okay.
But I'm still doing, like when I do the ACE, that virtual dry fire I do, that's strong side outside the waistband. So I'm still doing both.
Right.
But I'm doing dedicated isolation work on the appendix draw because that's the one that's coming up next.
Like
So does that make sense?
Yes,
Like you never
that helps a
neglect
lot.
anything, but
Yes.
you've got to prioritize what you need next over everything else.
Right. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm assuming throughout your years with law enforcement work and military, did you mostly train strong side, or did you also try to keep your training pretty variable? Is that the word? Mix it up.
So yeah, appendix was not popular again until towards the end of my career.
Okay.
Once it was popular, I adopted it. Like I was pretty much an early adopter of it. I trained with Gabe White pretty early on, and Scott Jedlinski when he first started doing his stuff. So I was actually one of 2 cops in Chicago that had a dot on my gun because I was doing all the testing for it and getting it approved for the department. So I was one of the first guys to have a red dot, and I would carry appendix off duty by then. But most of my stuff was done strong side, even from concealment, up until probably 10 years ago. So probably like 5 years before I retired. And that's when I started doing the appendix.
Okay.
And that was primarily because I saw Gabe White do it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty slick. I got to try that. And I tried it and I was like, oh, why am I not doing this? This is way better.
Yeah.
So, but like the plainclothes engagements I got in were either strong side hip or, this is dating me, or a hammerless snub nose revolver in a jacket pocket.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Chuck Haggard type stuff.
Yes, I was about to say, I was just about to say that. And that's so funny. I just had him on. Did you get it? I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the episode, but he was like, when everyone brings me up.
I haven't yet, but
okay. It's pretty funny.
I love Chuck. He
Right?
stayed at my house a couple times.
Oh,
He's a friend of
nice.
mine. Chuck's a great guy.
He is great.
Chuck's
It's
good
fun
people.
to listen to. Absolutely.
He's really good with the revolver, and Caleb Giddings is really good with the revolver too. I no
Yes.
longer own a revolver for the same reason I don't own a black powder rifle. It's obsolete technology.
That's really okay.
That's actually, I'm messing with both Caleb and Chuck.
Gotcha.
Revolvers absolutely have their place.
Okay.
And if I was still doing that kind of deep concealment undercover stuff, I would still go to a 5-shot snub nose with no hammer and a jacket pocket because your hand's on it.
Yeah.
And you can shoot through the jacket and it doesn't jam like a semi-auto does when you do that.
Interesting.
So that is where revolvers still shine, in my opinion,
very nice.
is for stuff like that.
While we're on the topic, what do you think of, I think Arrowhead Tactical is the name of the brand that's been kind of doing something similar, that have the clothing that has the built-in internal zippers that you can kind of like prepare your firearm through. Have you had a chance to check those out?
I haven't.
Okay.
It's a good concept for that purpose. It would
Yeah.
be a really good thing, I think, if it's done right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. I
I was
wasn't
just
sure if
walking into
you.
the projects. Yeah, I was walking into the projects to buy crack, so I just had like a messed up leather motorcycle jacket on, and I had my hand in my pocket on the gun.
That's that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. If I mean if yeah, that makes sense. I've never been in that particular situation, but yeah. What I'm like trying to relate to it without, actually relating to it. But how what do you think of, because this is something in training that I've been realizing. I start with my hands up when I'm training like defensive stuff. If I'm filming a video or something, of course USPSA has all the different start positions. But if you were walking and you sensed something in your environment, maybe someone was like, people were, is it called flanking when they start like
Yep.
coming around you flanking?
Yep.
I learned that from a movie the other
You
day.
can call it triangulating too, depending on how they're doing it.
Triangulating.
But
Okay.
basically, if one person is fixing you by facing you and the other one is coming around, that's flanking.
Flanking.
If they're
Okay.
both spreading wide, that's triangulation.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. That's something new to me. So say someone is flanking you and you're walking maybe down an alleyway. Do you, as a civilian, do you have your hand already on your concealment garment ready to pull? Say we're carrying inside the waistband appendix.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, it's very contextual, right?
Yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
feel I'm going to have to go for the gun, I'm going to do the cheater grab with my other hand underneath. I realize nobody can see it, but I'm
Right.
just gonna,
Yes. I can picture
where
it.
you got
Yeah.
your hand on the hem and the other
Right.
hand is on the gun. Yeah,
Yes.
I'll do that. If I think it may be more of a physical confrontation and not a shooting one, right? Because I'm not big on brandishing the gun for a fist fight,
Right. Of course.
because now you've already gone that step up, and now it's hard to go back down a step.
Right.
Um, I actually picked up a ready position. So there was a guy named DeCascos. His son, Mark DeCascos, was in one of the John Wick flicks. He was the bad guy, the shaved head bad guy, right?
Yes.
His dad, he's a phenomenal martial artist in real life. His dad was
Okay.
a phenomenal martial artist too. His dad's like favorite self-defense ready position was, let me see if I can get this on camera, was like one hand on the chin and the other hand underneath the elbow, like you're just thinking.
Interesting.
And then you've got your hands up already, but it's not confrontational looking.
Makes
So
sense.
I'll actually practice drawing. I practice drawing from thoracic like everybody else, right? But I'll also practice drawing from that position because it's very unassuming.
Yeah.
You're prepared, but it doesn't look combative, right?
Right.
And then obviously hands down, and then the pre-staging the hemline like we talked about.
Right.
And I like throwing in random stuff too.
Okay.
It's one of the cool things about USPSA is even though a lot of the start positions are artificial, it gets you used to going from any position into your draw, right?
Right.
And think about the real world. I mean, somebody's going to probably try to surprise you. So you might have groceries in your hand. You might have your car keys in your hand. You might be opening a car door. You might be in the process of getting in the car, right?
Yeah.
You could be opening a door into a store and you're walking into a robbery. So having your hands in all these different positions and still going to the draw with the same mechanics once you start, I think is really valuable, because the way I kind of look at it is you've got your basic fundamental skill, right? And then everything else is a distraction that is layered on top of that skill that inhibits the performance of the skill. The better you get, the more of those distractions you should be able to handle and still do the skill effectively. And that's an attribute you need to develop to be good at this stuff for the real world, I think.
Absolutely. And speaking of, this is something that I thought of earlier. I told you about, I'm a very novice instructor. Let me just be very clear. I've taught like 5 classes now, including one-on-ones. I'm NRA certified, and sorry, I'm not going to go into that. That doesn't really mean anything for people listening. But when I often find myself getting overwhelmed, just like I would think any new instructor would get overwhelmed with the amount of information that I want to share with this person who I may never see again, and I have no control over like the information they get going forward. So I really like to stress, we only have so much time in this session. There's so much, as far as like contextual training that you need past this like basic skill. And sometimes I like to give them examples, like the woman who said, when would it be appropriate to look around? And then we like did a little context-based training. But I even felt in her lesson that we were moving way too quickly. How do you, as an instructor, diagnose, especially in a class structure where you have people sometimes from just such various training backgrounds? How do you prioritize when to move from skill to context? I know you mentioned your classes being in two different, almost like levels, but are there any tips you have?
I think you have to kind of separate them that way.
Okay.
Like if I'm going to do contextual stuff, like say I was doing a private lesson, right? And he wanted some contextual stuff and some skill building stuff.
Yeah.
I would separate them. I would do the skill building first and then take like a little break and then do the contextual stuff. Okay. Because if you mix, and I'm going to come back, there's a point I want to come back to in a second, but if you mix those two things together, it's going to get blended together. And now you're going to have context working its way into the skill building, which is going to inhibit the building of skill.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to have the things you can do and should do if you're building the skill bleed over into the application and mess that up too. You know,
yes.
Like an example there. So Blake drill. For the people that don't know, Blake drill is 3 targets, usually at 7 yards, but you can change the distance. Usually about a yard apart, and it's 2 rounds on each target from the holster.
Okay.
The point of the Blake drill is to build speed on the transitions, which means when I do a Blake drill, I'm doing an artificial pace. It is not an application pace. I'm trying to match the transitions to my splits and just make, in other words, basically I'm pulling the trigger as fast as I can and making the gun move.
Right.
Which is not how you want to apply your shooting with multiple targets, because it's a recipe for disaster when you do that. It's a drill to develop skill. Now, if I'm shooting 3 offenders in the real world, the pace of my transitions would be based on seeing what I need to see for the shot. So that's a totally different mindset than shooting a Blake drill. So if I take a Blake drill and I take that mindset and bleed it over into a scenario, I'm going to have mics. I'm going to mess things up. I'm going to make mistakes because under pressure, that's not going to work for me because I'm redlining my transition speed. Am I making sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
So that's the kind of thing you don't want to get muddled, right? You don't want those things to come together that way.
Right.
And it's important to differentiate the two, because once again, it's all about the purpose of training. If I'm doing a scenario, the purpose of the training is to practice the scenario that I may actually have to do, right? To get used to that, to have done it in training so that if I do it in real life, I've already done it, at least in training.
Right.
You know, some analog of it anyway.
Yes.
The purpose of the drills and skill building is to build the skill. They're not meant to simulate a gunfight. They're not meant to simulate an encounter. They are meant to create a desired training effect. You know, and that's 2 entirely different approaches. So if you mix them, I think you're going to mess things up.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I wanted to get back to is interleaving training. So I talked how I have like different kinds of drills for skill building. I don't do those in block progression.
Okay.
So in other words, you want to kind of mix all those up because then you're always doing things that are fresh. They call it interleaving training. It's actually the way children learn as athletes.
Okay.
There's almost like an element of play in it. And you'll learn faster by doing that than by doing that in block form. But you've got to separate the application from the development. Otherwise, you're going to mess things up.
Absolutely. I think the first time I read about that type of training was in, oh my gosh, I just totally blanked on it. Oh my gosh, sorry. It is, oh my gosh, the book on winning in mind by, is it Lenny?
Yeah.
Lenny
Basham.
Lanny
yes.
Basham. Lanny Basham. Yes. Okay. Oof. I believe he goes into that type of training when he's talking about.
I think he does.
Okay.
I think he does. There's a few references to it in different books.
Okay.
If you like his book, read The Inner Game of Tennis.
The Inner Game of Tennis?
Yeah, I think it's actually more applicable to shooting, our kind of shooting, than Basham's book. Because Lanny was an Olympic rifle shooter, right? So he did the exact same thing every competition. We do something different every time we shoot.
That makes sense.
So it's a little bit of a different approach. But I really liked, Tim Herron actually turned me on to it, The Inner Game of Tennis. So I would definitely check that out.
Making a note. I will have it in the show notes for those that want to look into that. But Yeah, that's I've actually never heard of that one. Lanny Basham's book comes up like almost every other episode, so
Yeah.
I love that we're now able to that you are recommending another book on top of that. It's actually been something that I've been meaning to throw into every episode, like your top 3 books for either mindset or training, other than your own, of course, because do you have a top 3 that off the top of your head?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's easy.
Nice.
The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee, and Practical Shooting Beyond Fundamentals by Brian Enos.
I'm stuck on spelling
Brian
Jeet
Enos,
Kune
for
Do.
one of the guys that, yeah, one of the guys, for anybody that doesn't know, Brian Enos was one of the original top shooters in IPSC. He and Robbie Latham were training partners, and Robbie still shoots, but Brian is now off meditating and writing a blog. He's a very Zen kind of guy, but in my opinion, shooting is like the most Zen thing there is, because the more you try to force it and make it happen, the more it falls apart. You just got to allow it to happen.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. I love that. That's awesome. Right now I feel like I'm in the forcing stage, but I will, begin hopefully adopting that mentality soon.
Well, everybody's in that stage at first. Like,
Right.
it's you've got to do it consciously before you can do it subconsciously, right? But then
Right.
it really does. I think it really does become about stripping away rather than adding to.
Yeah.
You're simplifying and making it more pure. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like a process of. It's almost like when sculptors talk about, like Michelangelo talking about how the statue was in the block of granite, the block of marble, and he just set it free. He just chipped away
Oh,
everything that
wow.
wasn't the statue.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So I think it's kind of like that. You've got to strip away all the affectation, all the artificiality, all the conscious effort, and just pare that away over time, and just make it to where it's just this like pure subconscious thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really good point. Yeah. Moving the skill into the subconscious. That's oof, man. Yeah. That's become a really big theme
There's
lately.
Are you familiar with pistoltraining.com and the forum there, Pistol Forum on there?
I
It
do
was really
not.
big a few years ago. It's kind of
Okay.
dwindled down,
Okay.
but it's where the fast coin came from. I'm sure you've heard of the fast coin.
Yes, I have actually.
Okay. So somebody, I can't remember who did it, but somebody actually did a chart on automaticity. Automaticity is a fancy way of saying subconscious skill, right? A subconsciously competent level of skill. But they did this chart on at what point you've achieved automaticity in your shooting. And the guy actually did it for all the different disciplines. Like the fast coin is in there. Master and Grandmaster and USPSA are in there. Master and IDPA is in there. And where they all kind of rate on that chart of automaticity, it's actually really fascinating. And I don't know how accurate his work was, but it looked like he put a fair amount of effort into it. So it's probably at least a valid approximation of where those skill levels lie. And you can Google it and find it. Google automaticity shooting and the chart pops up. But going back to your earlier question about, how does a beginner decide what they need to be good at? Something like that is a great place to start, and you don't need to be a USPSA Grandmaster to be an effective shooter for self-defense. You honestly don't. Except maybe in like extreme outlier situations that most people would never encounter. There's what was his name? Tactical Performance Center, Ron Avery. There was a shooter named Ron Avery who was also a law enforcement officer. He's passed now, unfortunately. Really brilliant guy, very good trainer. But he said, and I really believe this, that B class in USPSA is basically like having a black belt in a legitimate martial art.
Makes sense.
And that seems like a sound comparison to me, because a B class shooter is actually pretty damn good.
Yeah.
A B class shooter in
Absolutely.
USPSA is probably in the top 0.1% of pistol shooters in the world.
Absolutely.
you know?
Yeah. Yes.
And the average shooter, this is subjective, it's not objective,
Right.
but based on my experience in special forces, the average shooter in special forces is probably a low B class shooter.
Okay.
But you take 12 low B class shooters that know how to work together as a team, and that's pretty damn formidable, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And the same thing for self defense.
Yeah.
It's a B class shooter is going to, no pun intended, blow away the average bad guy with ease because
Right.
the skill levels are so disparate, which is what you want. You want a disparate level of skill. You should never be looking for a fair fight in the real world. It's not the
Right.
place to do that. Go find a sport for that.
Right. I like that. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I was reading a little bit, of course, about your company and your training. So, would you like to take this opportunity to kind of like introduce how you and your wife teach together and how she teaches the women's? And I thought of her because I believe she's B class, right? USPSA.
She is.
Yes. So she has her
she's
black belt in shooting.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
Yes, she does. She's
How
a B
wonderful.
class shooter in USPSA and a good one.
Awesome.
She can, and here's the funny thing, right? And just a little sideline, and then I'll get back to her and I.
Yeah.
But people think that there's this insane difference between like a grandmaster shooter and say an A class shooter or B class shooter, right? There's little differences. They all add up, but it's little differences.
Right.
Each individual skill is not that different. It's over the broad category of all the skills, and it's also in the rate of error, how often you make mistakes, right? A GM is more consistent and just a little bit more polished on everything. But a B-class shooter having a good run can be a really impressive thing, especially if you don't have an educated eye. Like if you have an uneducated eye, you could take, JJ Ricazza and a B-class shooter and not watch them side to side, but watch one and then watch the other, and the uneducated eye would not see much of a difference. And I see this all the time in my applications class because I do a lot of person versus person stuff to add that stress of having an opponent, even though you're not shooting at each other, right?
Right.
The really good shooters beat the just decent shooters, but not by as much as you think, and not every time. It's a lot closer than people think. So, side note. All right. So back to Angela and me. So Angela is a B-class shooter. She was also a nationally competitive athlete when she was younger. She was a swimmer. So she knows how to train. She's got that mindset, right?
Yeah.
She is really good with beginners. I am better with more advanced people than I am with beginners because I want to get into the kind of things I've been talking about with you and someone who's brand new that's going to kind of go over their head a lot of the time.
Yeah.
She has got a great way with beginners. And one of the things she does when we teach together is I know I have someone I can count on to work with somebody on the line that I don't have time to work with to kind of bring them up to speed. Somebody who's lagging behind a little bit or having problems with something. She's fantastic with that. And her women's classes, she's really good at just kind of relaxing them and keeping them safe, but letting them understand that it's something they can do without being intimidated. And I'm not saying that people are intimidated because they're women. That's not what I mean.
Right. No.
Men get intimidated the first time they shoot too. They're just not going to admit it because they're guys.
Right. Yeah.
Right. She's also a phenomenal resource for me because we have different roles in the company, but they're both vital. I did nothing but be the muscle for the government my entire adult life. I am as institutionalized as a death row inmate. I don't know a thing about business, right? She was the office manager for a big business in Chicago and basically ran the whole thing.
Amazing.
So she's phenomenal at business.
Yeah.
So she's the one that makes sure I stay on track, and she does all that stuff and takes care of it and does like all the paperwork and all of that. And thank God, because I would be horrible at it. I really would. We kind of have this joke that, and I'm showing my age, but have you ever seen the reality show, The Osbournes? Ozzy Osbourne and his wife Sharon.
I know who they are. I know who they are. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, Ozzy has fried his brain beyond all repair, and Sharon handles everything for him because all he can do is the artistic stuff now.
Yes.
So we have this joke that I'm the Ozzy and she's the Sharon of the shooting world.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Angela, where am I teaching next weekend? Oh, Colorado. I like Colorado. Can I see my friend Riley? I like Riley.
I love that. That's awesome.
And she's like
Riley's gonna
handing
love
me the
that too.
tickets and
Yeah.
she's like, here's the itinerary, here's the class roster, here's everything you need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So no, she's
I love
fantastic.
that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You guys seem like an incredible power couple, and I'm excited. I'm looking forward to taking a class with both of you. I get both of
Yeah,
you, so that's
please,
so
please do.
cool.
The
Yeah.
one in Kansas would be fantastic if you can make it.
Yes, absolutely. After we hop off of this call, I'll make sure I pull up the right one, and I'll also have your entire website linked, everything, so that anyone listening can go to your class. I know that if I were listening to this episode, I'd want to take a class with you immediately. Just your background, your philosophy, and your support with Angela. I mean, it just sounds like an incredible time.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I
Absolutely.
try very hard to give people. So there's nothing wrong with going to a class and just enjoying it and getting a practice session, right?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But my intent has always been to give people more than that.
Yeah.
I want to give them, I want them to get things from the class that they can carry into their own training moving forward, because your
Yeah.
own training is where you really get better.
Yeah.
You can get a little better in a class, but it's only 2 days, no matter how many rounds you fire, right?
Right.
But dry firing, 4 or 5 times a week, or if you're chasing the dragon like me, I dry fire a couple hours a day, but I'm not
Amazing.
saying you should do that as a mentally stable individual. Um, but the point is that your own training is where you get better.
Yeah.
And the class is meant to give you tools you can use to program your own training, to coach yourself, to diagnose yourself, to get it better as fast as you can, as efficiently as you can, and reach your potential as early as you can. Because it shouldn't take decades. It really shouldn't. It should
Yeah.
be, if you train right, about 6 years, I think would get you to the top of your game. Which
Yeah.
sounds like a long time, but in a lifetime, it's not that long. It
Right.
really isn't.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I was just doing the math on how old I'd be. Yeah. So yeah, I'd be 31. So I mean, I'd be happy with that, to be, at the top of my game at 31. That'd be pretty cool. But I really like that. And along with your entire training philosophy, it's incredible, and I'm honored that we get a piece of that in this podcast, because as a host, it's so overwhelming to feel like the purpose of the podcast is meeting up when I have people like you on to talk about everything from traditional martial arts to military to law enforcement to civilian to the inner workings of skill development. So thank you so much. This entire conversation has been enlightening to me. I feel every time I get off of the phone with a guest speaker, I feel so selfish, because I'm like, I got to ask all these questions that I wanted to know, and I get to learn all these cool things. And like today, I asked a few things that are pertinent to my life right now, and I hope it is. I hope whoever's listening can connect with that. And I know there's just so many valuable things from this one episode alone. So thank you so much. And I'm not saying we have to end here. Is there anything that we talked about today that you wanted to go into more detail with, or anything that you feel like we left out of today's discussion?
I mean, there's so many things to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about. I really enjoyed the conversation,
I'm
but
so
I think
glad.
we should just schedule part 2 and do it again.
Yes, that'd be great. Absolutely. I would love to do
Well, I
that.
could do
Yeah.
that for sure. No,
Okay.
I'd like that a lot.
That sounds great. And maybe it could even be after I attend your class, and maybe I could, collect some questions during the class that I could bring on to the podcast. That might be a cool part too.
Oh yeah, no, we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
We could do that
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds great. I'll have to get some B-roll so I can overlay the conversation with it. But I'm really excited for that. Matt, thank you so much for your time and your service to our country. I always ask the guest speakers before we end the episode, is there anything you would like to send the listeners off with?
I think people need to look at their training as if the training itself is the purpose, right? And that's kind of the meaning of the book title, right? The way is in training. The event you're training for may never even happen,
Right.
or it may happen, once in your entire lifetime. But the training itself has purpose and intent, and it enriches your life. It does. It makes you a better person, it enriches your life. Just the act of seeking mastery in something has benefit in and of itself. So rather than try to get a quick fix or think about, I'm good enough to carry my gun, like, think of the training itself as the point, as the purpose. And I think that carries over for everything, not just shooting. And I think if you look at things that way, you'll have a lot more success in your endeavors, and you'll enjoy the process more, right? Because if all you're thinking about is the goal, the process becomes drudgery. And the process itself should be enjoyable. The process itself is the point. The journey is the destination, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. I thank you so much for sharing that. That was very, very well said, and spoke to a lot of things that, I'm currently experiencing in my life, as far as like shifting my mindset, to something that is more long-term. And, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't even know how to follow that up. That was incredible. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I'm so excited for part 2. I'm excited to take one of your classes. And of course, anyone listening, to access and how to get into contact with Matt and all of his training materials, you can see the show notes, which are the notes below the title. Turn on those notifications for part 2 with Matt Little. And in the meantime, if you would like to see some highlights from this episode, we have the She Shield Instagram and TikTok at She Shield Pod. Those are all made by Lisa Hamilton, my incredible podcast. I don't even know what to call her. She's part of the team. And she makes some incredible highlights to really showcase some incredible moments within the podcast episode. So go check those out. Thank you to Sagetta Gear, one of the official sponsors. To get 10% off your Sagetta Gear order, use code SHESHIELD10. That's SHESHIELD. And if you or anyone you know is experiencing a crisis and is a firearms owner, please take this time to look into holdmyguns.org, linked in the show notes. They are an organization that will connect you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you. This can also be for military personnel leaving the country and not wanting to leave their firearms at home behind with their maybe partners and children who do not know how to use them properly or safely. This can also be for someone who is moving to another state and the laws are changing, anything like that. Hold My Guns has an option for you. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant. Are you searching for a brand you can trust when it comes to shooting and gun care products? Look no further than Birchwood Casey. Since 1948, serious shooters, avid collectors, and professional gunsmiths have relied on Birchwood Casey. They've been in the game for over 70 years, providing us with products that have stood the test of time. From their legendary True Oil gunstock finish to the dependable Perma Blue, Birchwood Casey's commitment to quality is unmatched. Birchwood Casey has also revolutionized the way we train and improve our shooting skills with their innovative Shoot NC targets. These targets let you see your shots instantly, making it easier than ever to track your progress and become a better marksman. Head over to birchwoodcasey.com today and discover the products that have earned the trust of shooters worldwide. Use code SHESHIELD to save and to support the podcast. That's SHESHIELD at checkout.